A very wise man once said, one does not simply memorize glycolysis, but he also said, but he can definitely understand what it is, why it's important, making memorizing glycolysis much, much easier. So that is exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to follow the wise words of Sir Boromir and understand what exactly is glycolysis and why it's important. So here we have a cell, and this is a single cell, and in our body we have roughly around 30 trillion cells. And so what do these cells use as a source of energy? What's their primary source of energy? That is this little molecule right here, also known as ATP. And so this right here is an adenosine molecule, and these three are phosphate groups. So ATP can very efficiently release and store energy in form of phosphate groups. So how many of these molecules do you think a single cell uses per second? How many ATP molecules does a cell use every second? Take a guess. It's roughly 10 million ATP molecules per second. I know, crazy, right? So this is an average number. So there are some cells like red blood cells which roughly use around 2 million ATP molecules. And then we have our cardiac muscle cells. So cardiac muscle cells use around 50 billion ATP molecules per second. And keep in mind, we have around 30 trillion cells in our body. So every single second, all these cells, our body uses around 300 quintillion ATP molecules. And this number is huge. So many zeros. I mean, it's very hard for me to just wrap my head around this huge number. So to put in perspective, let's say a genie grants you a wish of getting $100 billion per day. You know how long it would take you to reach this number? It would take you roughly 8 million years if you get $100 billion every day to come up with this number. That's insane. So it's fair to say our cells they're not gold diggers, but they're ATP diggers. So now, how does our body keep up with the demand of ATP molecules? Luckily, we have a factory in our cells that specialize in synthesizing ATP molecules. Do you know what that's called? It's called a mitochondria. So within our mitochondria, we have something known as oxidative phosphorylation. So oxidative phosphorylation can be divided into electron transport chain, and this part which synthesizes ATP molecules is called chemiosmosis. Now the question becomes, okay, what powers the electron transport chain? I'll give you a hint. The answer is literally within the name, electrons. So electrons power the electron transport chain. But where are these electrons coming from? Glad you asked. They come from NADH and FADH2. So these two molecules provide the electron transport chain with electrons. So now you might ask, where do these come from? Well, they come from something known as Krebs cycle. And so to enter the Krebs cycle, you need this molecule called acetyl-CoA. So now you might ask, where does acetyl-CoA come from? Great question. So acetyl-CoA can be synthesized by proteins. So proteins will be broken down into amino acids, and these amino acids can eventually form acetyl-CoA. But the problem is our body would rather use proteins and amino acids to fix and build up our tissues. Okay, what about lipids? So we have lipids here, and an example is a triglyceride. So triglyceride can be broken down into free fatty acids and a glycerol molecule, which can then eventually form acetyl-CoA. But the problem is, it takes a very long time to break down these lipids, and only if there's a source of quick energy. Well, luckily we have carbohydrates. So carbohydrates can be broken down into monosaccharides. And we have total 3 monosaccharides. So glucose can be broken down into 2 pyruvate molecules and then eventually form acetyl-CoA. So these are two pyruvate molecules. Each of them will form a single acetyl-CoA molecule. So what about the other two monosaccharides? Here we have glucose, here we have fructose, and here we have galactose. So can fructose and galactose also synthesize acetyl-CoA? Well, yes and no. So these two, just relying purely on their own metabolic pathway, they cannot form acetyl-CoA, both of these. So what they do instead is they can enter glycolysis, which is this pathway, this metabolic pathway. They can enter glycolysis and then eventually end up synthesizing acetyl-CoA. So to sum it up, we have a glucose molecule, which is broken down into two pyruvate molecules, and which will form an acetyl-CoA molecule, and then enter the Krebs cycle, and then eventually go into oxidative phosphorylation. So you know what this whole thing is called? This whole thing is called cellular respiration. So we're gonna dive deep into every single one of these pathways, and starting with glycolysis. We're going to cover that in the next lecture. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you found it helpful, make sure to like and subscribe and share with someone who might be struggling in this topic. Go make their day.